Welcome to Module 5, the Common Data Service and Dynamics 365. In this module, we'll be covering an overview of the Common Data Service, looking at scenarios where you could leverage the Common Data model with Dynamics 365. We'll also learn how to create and manage the Common Data Service components, such as custom entities and attributes that would fit our particular scenarios. From a high-level perspective, the Common Data Service provides a scalable, secure, compliant data store to enable rapid application development. A key component of the service is the Common Data Model that provides a predefined schema for the most common data used in business applications. Data from other systems, including Dynamics 365 apps, can be synchronized into the Common Data Service. This allows PowerApps and Microsoft Flows to be built using a single data source, reducing the complexity of interacting with multiple systems. In addition to the Common Data Model, custom entities can be defined to support custom scenarios being built using the Common Data Service. For those of us coming from Dynamics 365, the Common Data Service model should feel fairly similar to what we have in Dynamics 365. It uses a similar entity model pattern for modeling the data and its relationships. If you remember in the overview module, we talked about PowerApps environments as a way to separate things like dev, test, or even different regions of your company. Each of those environments can have one Common Data Service database defined for it. Inside each database, you get the standard entities, or as we refer to it, the Common Data Model. The Common Data Service uses a role-based security to control data usage. When the Common Data Service was first announced, I heard all kinds of different ways people intended to use it or thought that it was intended to be used. I wanted to talk about some of the planned and not planned scenarios. First of all, let's talk about some of the planned scenarios. So pulling data from other systems to enable work on consolidated data, meaning I might pull data from Office 365, from Dynamics 365, and then build an application that works on that data simply using the Common Data Service. That's perfectly a planned scenario. New purpose-built applications with PowerApps and Flow that store data in the standard and custom entities. That's also a planned scenario. That's a good way if you have a small application you need to get running quickly. You don't need all the things that you would normally find in Dynamics 365. You just want some of the features that come with the Common Data Service. Again, that's a perfectly good way to use the Common Data Service. It's not intended to be a replacement for the Dynamics 365 apps databases. And that's something that if you go back in time on the ERP, they had attempted to replace the ERP side database with a common one, and that just became a bigger effort. And you can imagine trying to do that across ERP and Dynamics 365 in customer engagement applications would just be a lot of work to accomplish. But bringing that data together, allowing consolidated access to it, that's where some of the pre-built synchronization will make sense. It's also intended to be a transactional database, not to be used as a data warehouse. Now, that doesn't mean that some people won't use it as a data warehouse. That just means it's not the planned intent of the Common Data Service. The Common Data Model is evolving fairly rapidly with feedback from the community, so I'm not going to list all the individual entities that make up the Common Data Model. Rather, I'm going to look at broad categories so that we can kind of discuss and you can kind of get an idea. You'll want to check in the actual Common Data Model at the time that you're using it to see what has been added. For example, they've recently added some additional ones that would be considered in the person category, and that's a continuing evolution as they get the feedback. But you can look at some of the things like Foundation that have entities like Business Unit, Cost Center, Product. Person has obvious things like person and contact, but even some more specialized things like fan and tenant that you might use for certain scenarios. Groups, teams, households, family, organization would be more like companies and accounts as we would think about them. From a purchasing side, things like vendor, purchase order, sales, you get into the partner sales invoice, basically tracking the actual sale that you're working with. And then from a customer service standpoint, case, KB article, case activity, standard things you would think of around a service type scenario. Let's talk about how a sales scenario using the Common Data Model might roll out in the future as things evolve. Today, the Common Data Model includes the account and opportunity entity. In the future, there will be additional entities added to the model to support common Office 365 data such as meetings and emails. Using the synchronization capabilities in the future, data from Dynamics 365 and Office 365 will be synchronized into the Common Data Service. This would allow PowerApps and Flows to be built using this Common Data Service without having to use multiple individual connectors. That will make it easier to build sales scenarios on top of the Common Data Service. So speaking of synchronizing data with the Common Data Service, let's talk about what's there now and what's planned for the future at a high level. So currently, there is no automatic synchronization in place. You could use Microsoft Flow or even Logic apps to push data one way into the common database that you define. Consider for now leveraging the connectors, though, and not replicating the data. That makes you not have to worry about some of the issues, such as conflicts and so forth, if the data is already there from another source. GUID IDs can be added as pointers to Dynamics 365 data in the Common Data Service if you need to point back to the record, or if you create a custom entity that you're tracking data from Dynamics 365. Now in the future, the current techniques will still work and lookup fields will still continue to work, but there'll oftentimes be better approaches with some of the automatic synchronization that is being developed. There's also in the works a Pro SDK that will be available for more custom scenarios where you need to push data or get data from the Common Data Service using a developer API. Now let's talk a little bit about working with entities. Currently there are 65 entities when a new database is created at the time of this recording. Obviously that will change and evolve as the model evolves from community feedback. The names of the existing entities are not changeable to ensure its consistency. You can, however, add new fields to existing entities, but you can't change existing fields. And relationships are supported, but at this time you can only create new N-to-1 relationships lookups on both new and existing entities. Similar to creating an entity in Dynamics 365, when you create a new entity in the Common Data Service, you'll provide an entity name as well as a display name that will be used. There's not currently a plural name like you're used to in Dynamics 365. Now, when you create the new entity, a set of attributes will be automatically created, very similar to how Dynamics 365 works as well. Things like created record date, modified by, created by, are all created. Now, you'll notice that created by and modified by are text fields rather than lookups like we're used to in Dynamics 365. Instead of using a GUID as the ID for records, they use a auto number, which is essentially an integer that is created for you, and that's referred to as the primary ID of that entity. When you're creating new fields, you have a number of different data types that are available for support, from simple ones like Boolean to more complex ones like address, and even some ones that we wish we had in Dynamics 365 like auto number. When you create a new field, you pick a display name, the name of the field, and then the type, and then that will create the field. Now, once you've created the field names can't be changed after they've been created. You can, however, change the data type of the field until there is data in that actual field on the entity. Just like Dynamics 365 supports relationships for modeling interaction between the different data entities, so does the Common Data Service. Right now, only the N-to-1 relationships are currently supported, but expect that to evolve as the Common Data Service continues to mature. So in this example, I'm creating a relationship from a trip entity where I want to track the traveler on that trip. So effectively, I'm relating it to the person, to the trip entity, and I'm calling that a traveler relationship, allowing me to track the actual traveler on that particular trip. One area related to fields that is a little bit unique from what we have in Dynamics 365 is the concept of field groups. It allows for the grouping of one or more fields into a set of fields or a field group to allow to speed up the application creation and maintenance. So field groups are shared across applications that use the entity. The idea behind field groups is on the visual side, once that field group has been defined, instead of individually putting the individual fields on the visual canvas that you're building, the screen, you would simply put the field group, bringing that whole set of fields along together as it was defined in the field group. This helps promote consistency. It also makes it easier to maintain the application because when a change is made in the future to that field group, it is reflected in all the applications that use that field group. In order to access data in the Common Data Service, users must have a role assigned to them that gives them permissions to the individual entity. The role-based security model deals with authorization at the entity level, not at the record level at this time. Users or groups can be assigned to security roles. It's important to understand when we're talking in the context of integrating with Dynamics 365, these are separate security roles than what you would think of in Dynamics 365. And at the time of this recording, there's not an asynchronization putting the user in similar groups. Security roles relate to permission sets, and permission set define a set of access to one or more entities. Similar to what we're used to with Dynamics 365 security principles, when a user has multiple roles, they get the accumulated permission across the different roles. The access level tracks are create, read, update, and delete. And the Common Data Service comes with permission sets for all of its entities, grouped into two permission sets, a view permission set as well as a maintain permission set. But you can create your own to meet your individual application needs. That wraps up our module on the Common Data Service. The Common Data Service provides a known base schema that can be expanded with custom entities. That means that regardless of whether it's organization A or organization B, you can be confident that the same base entities will be in both those schemas, allowing not only internal applications to be built, but as we look beyond that, where we build applications that work with the Common Data Service, we have a known set of data model that will always be there. Data doesn't have to be synchronized with the Common Data Service for all scenarios. Many can still just use the connectors. So you have to evaluate each scenario to see what's the best fits the needs of the application. The Common Data Service in the context of Dynamics 365 can be very helpful to support data storage of purpose-built applications that wouldn't need the data stored in Dynamics 365. But that is something you'll have to consider as you build applications. Should the data be stored with other data in Dynamics 365, meaning it would be useful and is more enterprise-related data, or is it something that's more tracking or transitory data or data that would be better suited in the Common Data Service? Both of those are options, and you'll have to evaluate them on each individual application case. Welcome to the course review. In this final module, I just want to simply review some of the modules that we've gone through and give you some next steps for continuing your learning. This course was made up of 5 modules, and you've now reached the 6th one, the course review. In the first module, we did an overview of PowerApps, Flow, and the Common Data Service. If you happen to skip this module, you might want to go back to it to get the big picture of how these all work together and some of the things you should be aware of at a 50,000-foot perspective. In Module 2, we dove right into looking at how we connect to Dynamics 365. We saw that there are 2 types of connectors, one for Dynamics 365 customer engagement applications, as well as one for Dynamics 365 operations. We talked about the need, if you move an application from a development to test to production instance, how you need to reconfigure the connector as you're moving the application. Connectors are not just for Dynamics 365. There are also a number of connectors that can be used from everything from SharePoint to Twilio to Twitter and OneDrive, just to name a few. You also have the ability to have developers create some custom web APIs or Azure functions and plumb those in to be able to be called from the PowerApps application. In Module 3, we focused on some of the common PowerApps tasks, things that you need to do when you build applications that work with Dynamics 365. You'll want to look for common tasks that you do in your own applications or things that you can share with the rest of your teams as you continue to build on and learn more about the PowerApps application. A good source for learning more about some of the things that you might want to look into is the PowerApps documentation. A lot of them provide details on a lot of the additional functions that you can use within your expressions. In Module 4, we switched gears and started talking about Microsoft Flow and Dynamics 365. We learned when we would use a Microsoft Flow versus the internal workflow that Dynamics 365 customer engagement applications have available. We also talked about the different ways that you can trigger them, from triggering on events that happen in Dynamics 365 to being called from a PowerApps application directly, or even a button on the Flow mobile application. We learned how you can also schedule them to trigger based on a schedule. Microsoft Flow provides a great way to automate tasks across different systems. They leverage the same connectors that we talked about in Module 2 for using them from PowerApps, but we now use them in the context of a background running automation. And finally, in Module 5, we looked at the Common Data Service. Common Data Service can be used for building applications from scratch that need to store data in a scalable cloud-based data storage engine, or they can be used for PowerApps that integrate with Dynamics 365 to store kind of working data that isn't appropriate to store in Dynamics 365's application database. When you create a database in the Common Data Service, we learned how it starts with the Common Data Model, a set of entities that make up standard business data storage, bringing together the best of what you'd find in ERP, CRM, as well as Office productivity type applications into one place with a common schema definition. And that's it. You've made it to the course review module where we've recapped all the different modules that you've gone through. Now, of course, what I would recommend is to do the practice exercises that were included as part of the course because they get you hands-on experience working with PowerApps, Flow, and the Common Data Service. Also, your learning is not over because all 3 of these are continuing to evolve and mature as each release comes out. You'll want to check PowerApps.com frequently for new learning opportunities, and to keep up with all the changes that are released, they announce them on their blog. Thanks for joining us with this course. We look forward to seeing you in the next course.